Destination set.
Engine instrument, check. Flight control, check. And
Okay, hello there YouTube. As I get things set up here, I'm starting a little bit late because, well, it turns out with FSX, apparently it doesn't like my second monitor, so it blanks it out, so I have no way of reading chat. And then it seemed like every single Chromebook and or laptop in the house was low on power, so we're going to be flying to Dayton, Ohio, on board a 727-100 from Captain Sim. It's hot down here. It is hot out here today. Should be 2994 out right now. So plane should be loaded here in about 3 minutes. Unfortunately right now, doesn't look like... Live chat. There we go. Right. So wait for a couple of minutes here, check and see. But this is the Captain Sim 727-100 in the TWA livery. Interestingly enough, TWA really didn't fly the 727-100 much in the United States. It was kind of the backbone of their continental European operations throughout the 1970s and even into the 1980s. In which I believe Europe had some more stringent regulations governing two-engine jets, hence why the British developed the Trident and widely used the 727 series as well, was to get over some of the European airspace regulations very early on in the 60s and 70s, as engines weren't considered to be all that reliable. So the 727 and the 100 and 200 variant was the airliner that kind of built the airlines through the jet age, at least, and brought it to the masses. The 727-100 carried around 100 passengers, give or take, depending on seating configuration, and really served a role that today would be served by, well, jets like the Embraer 145, 135, more at probably their E-Jet series, the 175, 195. But what made this aircraft somewhat remarkable for its day is it had an APU, an auxiliary power unit, meaning it didn't need a ground power cart. Also, it had integrated air stairs at both the rear end of the aircraft, which is important. We'll talk a little bit more in the history of that, and why that kind of made it a favorite for hijackers throughout its history, but also at the main gate as well, meaning that you didn't have to have an airport with all the amenities. You didn't have to have a stair truck or a jetway in order to fly this aircraft into smaller regional airports that maybe didn't have all of the services that major airports. So it really opened up the market and also helped airlines pioneer the hub-and-spoke model. Now, it was a competitor to the similarly sized 737-200, but a couple of things that made the 737-200 perhaps a little bit more beneficial, and probably the reason today why you see the 737 series continuing on and you don't see any new 727s being built, is the fact that it held a similar number of passengers, but only required a crew of 2 rather than 3, and also only has 2 engines versus 3. Of course, anytime you have an extra engine, that's going to increase your fuel consumption and maintenance costs. But really, it was the fact that it had the integrated air stairs, which add weight in the front and rear of the aircraft, which also affects, I know, again, cost efficiency and seat per mile costs. It also had the engineer station on board as well. Again, very much a plane designed in a slightly different era. So go ahead and request taxi. So where are we here? I believe we're on concourse C, which would have historically been where TWA would have been located during its tenure. This is concourse C here. It's still in use today. This is probably arguably the busier of the two. Well, I guess maybe not. I guess it could be argued that concourse A is a little bit busier this day and age. So we'll let this truck pass, and then we will request pushback. And I think we're just going to go straight back today. Go into the virtual cockpit. Beacon light is on. Taxi light's on. No smoking. Definitely from a different era. Start on engine 3. Which, I have the throttles pushed a little bit forward. This is because it's on my seat throttle quadrant. If I push them too far back, you notice how it kind of jitters there. It has a tendency to want to trigger the thrust reversers when it really shouldn't. So it should be about 20% RPM. This aircraft is not nearly as picky about things as the 707, and making sure that you have to hit it exactly at 20%. Start engine 2. I think you'll probably push back enough. Turn on the parking brake. Set takeoff trim. Should be flaps 5. Oh yes. We'll wait until we're fully powered up, and then we'll put power to the hydraulic systems.
Ladies and gentlemen, please pay attention
Engine 2 start.
display the safety features and procedures of
Engine
the
1.
aircraft in case of emergency. During an emergency, please remain in your seats with your seatbelt
Now,
fastened.
this with FsPassengers in career mode is horrible to fly because FsPassengers doesn't recognize where some of the lights are. It's good. Stabilize out. Alright, switch to generator 2, switch to generator 1. Turn off the APU. Not going to need it today at ground level, certainly, but I'm going to go ahead and turn on the fuel heaters over here. And we will go ahead and give our flight attendant galley power. Those are supposed to be closed. The only lights that are on are for the landing gear doors. And we will start some music on the tarmac. That's not what I want. I want inside cockpit, captain's view. Now, this aircraft is far easier to taxi than the 737-200 from Captain Sim, which, I don't know, sometimes it was as though taxi lights were on, or nose-wheeled steering was engaged, other times it was like it wasn't. Turn on our lights. Okay, flaps 5. Ground power cart there. Lots of traffic on the tarmac today. This is the Captain Sim 727-100. I bought this aircraft about 2 years ago. Every year, usually in January, Captain Sim puts all of their products on sale for $10 a pop. And a couple of years ago, I guess it was last year, I loaded up on several of their products for like $40, $50. The problem was then FSX quit working, and I just didn't have time last year to go deal with it. In fact, I didn't get FSX in all of my mods and add-ons and stuff reinstalled until Christmas of last year. So basically, most of last year, FSX wasn't working for me. It would literally crash on startup all the time, and apparently it was a Windows 10 user access control problem. It was pretty well documented, and I tried all of the workarounds, the easy solutions, and eventually I just had to delete and reinstall. I guess too many third-party add-ons. So we're at Kilo Sierra Tango Lima, which is no longer Lambert and St. Louis International Airport. It is now St. Louis Lambert International Airport. Yes. I think they spent about $2 million determining what to call it, which was better than the other name they were considering, which was St. Louis International Airport at Lambert Field. It was really an excuse for the people who run the airport to give one of their friends who owns a marketing company a couple of $1 million to come up with a new idea of why they then have to spend another $1 million to buy new signs. And, yeah, you wonder why St. Louis St. Louis Lambert International Airport has some of the highest landing fees in the country. I believe right now it's just under $9 per 1,000 pounds gross weight, and also terminal leases and stuff like that are also exorbitantly expensive. Thanks to the 1129 runway, which was, by the time it was actually construction was started and it was completed, the volume at the airport had decreased by over half of what it was in 2000, when the airport handled 30 million passengers. Of course, this is when we were a hub for then TWA, which was bought in 2001, before 9/11 actually. TWA was acquired by American in, I believe, May of... Oh, and if you hear my phone going off in the background, that will happen. I have to keep it on because technically
30 left.
I'm still sort of on the clock for work. The way that my job works is usually by Friday noon, nobody's left
On
in the
runway
office
30 left.
out on the West Coast, so unless something goes wrong, if something goes horribly wrong, oh yes, we need to turn off our music. Like that.
knots.
However, that's not a phone call. That's people wanting to sell me siding, so I know what that phone call is. Not so worried about that. Good evening. In FSX today.
V1. Rotate. V2 plus 10. Gear up. Flaps up. Gear up.
Alright, gonna throttle back. This plane will get up and go to 250 knots quite readily.
Slats retract.
Slats up. Adjust trim for climb. Okay, I have to watch because my controls for FSX and X-Plane are slightly different on the flight sim yoke, so I'm sometimes hesitant, like, I hope I'm hitting the right button. That's what happened to me, Concord Alex. Also, I apologize if I have to kind of, let's see here, turn right heading 320. Now we can sort of cheat with this airplane because it does offer GPS navigation as an option. I also have the flight nav log printed off here. Hooray, laser printer! Wireless laser printer. It's actually, I don't know, I guess it is connected to the WAN, or the LAN, rather. Of course, no auto throttle on this aircraft, and you'll notice some elements, once we kind of get up here, I am going to go ahead and move the autopilot to a place where it's a little bit more reachable for a single person flying the aircraft. I love and also hate flying this aircraft at the same time. It is one of my favorite FSX aircraft that I have. I also have the 727 Flying JSIM 727 for X-Plane 10, and I'm waiting for the 11 update for that. That's also pretty good. I'm going to adjust the trim here. A little bit of turbulence. Increase throttle so you can get through it. Climbing out at about 2,000 feet per minute, and my landing gear did go up, right? Yes. Not too bad, other than I was adding the menus to the next element that needs to be developed. And it started crashing X-Plane 11 on startup. So I'm not sure. I've commented out that section of code. I know where it is, I just don't know why. In particular, trying to add a new menu item would do that, but it does it. But I have the flight monitoring mostly working. I was testing it last night. I've been adding more details to it. I've gotten the basic. It can detect when you've taken off, your cruise mode, and then landing, and record like what your touchdown velocity and feet per minute and all of that good stuff are. Acknowledge. And making sure that during your flight you're not going over certain bank angle limits and stuff like that. But I was trying to add some detection of for damage to determine whether or not you've done damage to the aircraft on landing based on your vertical speed. And I can't tell if I was just landing poorly or if it's not really detecting what I need it to detect, so I've got to work on that a little bit more. But it can detect when you've landed, for the most part. There's a couple of things. For instance...
Passing 10,000 feet, Captain.
Alright, time to turn off our lights, even though the Captain Sim and FsPassengers doesn't apparently detect whether or not these lights are on or off. One of the problems with the way that FsPassengers is designed.
Kansas City Center, Tango Bravo 068 is climbing to 21,000, Tango Bravo 068, Kansas City Center, Roger, altimeter 29903.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is now safe to use your portable electronic devices.
Really? So, Steam, wow, that's weird. I didn't have that problem. I had a problem that when I would start FSX, it would crash. And basically, at first it was FS Captain that was giving me the problem, so I uninstalled FS Captain, and then it was FsPassengers, and then it was RAS Professional, then it was another add-on. Right. I think it's time to go ahead and...
We are now serving sandwiches.
So I'm currently hand flying the aircraft. Hopefully, I'm hoping next week. My goal was to have it in a demonstratable position by the end of July, and I think I'll, if I can figure out what's going wonky with the menu, and then get the pilot creation and points logging, all of that done with the database work, which, again, if I can get the menu thing added to the menu, I should have all of that done next week. There's not a whole lot of coding there, it's just kind of grunt work. And then September, or not September, August is going to be adding in support for aircraft management, buying, selling aircraft, as well as hopefully getting some of the economic stuff set up for airline management side of things. That probably will bleed into September. And then by the end of September, September will be a little bit of spit and polish work. A lot of spit and polish work, improving performance and stuff like that. I think I am going to go ahead and kind of do a little bit of cheating and go to GPS, nav lock,
Auto flight.
and we are above 10,000 feet, so we can push the engines. Now this is the flight director down here. Nav lock, we can go ahead and turn on. Oh, I think we had WX on, weather radar. It does have a functioning weather radar. Now the 727, I believe some of them were retrofitted for GPS navigation, but most of them that I've seen were board-to-board radio navigation. So we're being a little bit cheaty here. Yes, it does detect if you land at the incorrect airport. And it does, well, the way that I have it set right now, it automatically fills in the from to to, or to from. It fills out the from airport based on where you are. So that's your originating destination.
Bravo 068, turn left heading 075, resume on navigation. Turn left heading 075, proceed on course. Tango Bravo 068.
Let's see here. Does the yoke disappear on this one? World. Instant replay. Doesn't look like it. Okay. So I need to go to virtual.
We're reaching transition altitude, Captain.
Go 2992.
Tango Bravo 068, contact Kansas City Center on 127.7.
Information services on board. Start a movie. We're going to start an episode of The Joy of Painting. So people are going to get to see
Ladies and gentlemen, we have just started
happy
a
little
flight
trees.
displaying on the screens ahead. You will find a set of headphones to your left. You can adjust the language
gonna
and volume on the dials.
Put our
next to
nose
your
down, increase speed. And we're going to go up, I think they said 22,000 or 23,000. I don't remember.
Kansas City Center, Tango Bravo 068 is at flight level.
Howdy ho there, Steph.
Climbing flight level 210. Tango Bravo
Really,
068,
FSX.
Kansas City Center, roger.
Let's see here. Only works with DirectX 10. That's interesting because DirectX 10, my understanding was an FSX. That was only like the aircraft preview screen was DirectX 10. I don't know if the entire program runs in DirectX or not. Or DirectX 10. I think it was all DirectX 9. Well, I'm a little bit biased, but I like...
068, climb and maintain flight level 290. Climb and maintain flight level 290. Tango Bravo 068.
But I'm a fan of the if it ain't Boeing, it's not going. But anyway, you can kind of see some of the semblances here of an early, I guess you could say an early example of elements that would eventually become what is commonly referred to as the Boeing Common Flight Deck. Basically, these controls, again, not identical because you got two-engine, well, pretty much everything in this day and age is two-engine aircraft or four-engine aircraft in the case of the 747 from Boeing. But the basic configuration has remained essentially unchanged. I think that the 737-200, the 732, is even more like that. Again, you still kind of have autopilot being functional down here. This is why I put autopilot up here on the hotkey, is because when we're talking about a flight simulator add-in like this is a plane that in the real world was designed to be flown by three people. An engineer, a pilot, and a co-pilot. And it makes it very difficult for a single individual really to be operating all of these systems at one time in a simulation. Hence why I went ahead and put the autopilot controls up here. I don't have track IR on at the moment because I think for streaming purposes it's kind of... it annoys some people. It detracts from the experience because especially I tend to like to look around a lot. So... but at least with the Boeing Common Flight Deck, it makes retraining pilots, I know with type certification and stuff like that, but if you've flown a 737, you can very easily transition over to a 757, 767, 777. The general layout and systems are very, very similar.
Tango Bravo 068. Contact at the city center on 124.
Then it's a lot about learning performance and
Tango Bravo 068.
really the performance characteristics and emergency procedures.
068 is at flight level 252, climbing flight level 290. Tango Bravo 068 at the city center, roger.
Better serve some drinks too. Everybody wants a little bit of alcohol.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are now serving drinks.
So once we get up here to the cruise portion of the flight, we'll look at the external livery. And again, this is an aircraft that I don't want to say necessarily pioneered, but was used a lot to fly to smaller and medium regional airports.
Delta 2245 with you. Delta 2245 Kansas City Center, roger.
Because again, it had the integrated air stairs, it had an APU, it didn't require a ground power unit, didn't require jetway, didn't require a stair truck. So you could fly it into smaller destinations, and of course, we're also talking about an era, at least, of civil aviation in the United States that was still highly regulated onto what air routes carriers could fly and how much they could charge. It was designed in such a way to ensure that airlines maintained a profit, or at least made a profit. Up until the late 1970s, when deregulation took effect, and I haven't done all of the audio recording for the video that canonically should happen before this on my YouTube channel here, but going to be talking about the Wright Amendment down at Love Field in that one. Finishing up the flights with the Southwest livery 732, which I was in Dallas about a month ago. Went to the Frontiers of Flight Museum down there, and I should intersperse some photos I took there. And we'll probably get into a little bit more of that with the next airline we'll be talking about. Alright, now that we're up, nav 2 should be 117.4. Next waypoint should be 116.3.
Tango Bravo 068, traffic is 11 o'clock, 4 miles at flight level 320, MD-90, 47 site. Delta 2245, traffic is 8 o'clock, 4 miles at flight level 284, Boeing 727, 47 site. Tango Bravo 068, traffic in sight.
So again, interestingly enough, and we're flying at 29,000 because I do not believe that in the real world this aircraft would contain the required equipment to fly above this level, flight level. If you look at VIP 727 aircraft that still exist of this category, they're usually flying at or below about 27,000 on most of their filed flight plans. Altitude hold. So yes, 116.3. Again, notice there is no standby frequency. That should give us. So it looks like frequency. It looks like number 2 is not registering. DME 1 is detecting we're 121 nautical miles from that destination. Got a movie playing, they've got food and drinks. Should make them happy. You can go ahead and hide the menu bar. And we can take a look outside. As we fly over the state of Illinois. Actually, we may be closer to the state of Indiana at this point. So I know people who flew the 727 for TWA, more particular the 727-200, or the 72S. As the larger 727-200 was the aircraft that TWA flew as the backbone of their fleet in the United States. But this aircraft, the 727 series, built airlines, most of the major carriers, and even a lot that you don't hear of anymore. Basically, anybody who was a major air carrier during the 70s and 80s flew this aircraft. PSA, Pacific Northwest, Braniff, TWA, American, Eastern Airlines, Delta, United, pretty much anybody who was anyone in the airline game. Pan Am flew this aircraft as well. Although it had a number of, I guess you could say, interesting problems. Now, a lot of pilots loved this aircraft because the engines were at the back, all three, and thus it was a relatively quiet aircraft, at least for the cabin crew and air crew, to fly in. And again, the same with many passengers, unless you were in the rear of the aircraft. It was a relatively quiet experience. However, outside the aircraft, the 727, and really this is kind of a phenomenon when all of the tri-engine aircraft, the Trident was no different, were just very, very loud. In fact, another strike against this aircraft is as more and more municipalities and governments around the world enacted noise pollution laws, the 727 began to fall out of favor. Now, FedEx developed independently the Hush Kit, which, interestingly enough, Boeing elected not to go back and design and integrate their own. Instead, they sent their customers to FedEx, who FedEx had a quite profitable business there for a while, retrofitting 727 aircraft for airlines around the world with Hush Kits to try to quiet them down. Now, this also oftentimes included adding winglets to the aircraft for slightly better fuel efficiency and fuel economy as well. But yeah, the Hush Kits were developed by FedEx. Now, the 727 today is still in use as a cargo airline. The last commercial airline operator was Iran, one of Iranian's national airlines. Yeah, so we're now out of Illinois and into Indiana somewhere. But it is actually illegal to fly a 727 due to its noise pollution in the country of Australia. Now, this is one of the things I don't like about FSX's built-in ATC. They seem to switch you over frequencies very quickly. One of the things that I did notice when doing research on this aircraft is that of the 100 variant, only maybe a dozen are left flying in the world. More so in what's called the Super 80. Sorry, is it Super 100? No, Super 227. Super 80 is the MD-80. Super 27, which is a 727 outfitted for corporate or VIP usage, there are a number of those still flying. I think that number's around a dozen, and then there's another half dozen to 10 flying, usually in a cargo, well, all of them are in cargo configuration for various small airlines and cargo haulers, primarily in Central and South America, from what I could gather. There are some that have essentially turf packages or tundra tires that allows the aircraft to land on dirt strips. And there's some footage on YouTube of a 727 landing on a dirt strip in Africa. I believe, though, in a cargo configuration again. But there are a number still flying, including Donald Trump's former 727 that he sold about 10 years ago. I think that's now operated by, like, Westar. But that airplane is still flying passengers, in particular, on transcontinental routes. And I don't know if it's still available for sale, but there's another 727s for sale in the last year. Sale price $700,000, used to be the Colorado Rockies team airplane. It's one of those things that I'm like, $700,000 for a 727, that's getting in my wheelhouse. I can actually afford that. Well, if I sold all my farms and everything, yeah, I could afford to buy it. I couldn't afford to fly it at $10,000 an hour, is roughly what the given cost of operating a 727 is at this day and age. Well, I couldn't afford to fly it anywhere, but I thought that was interesting. It was configured in a 68-seat configuration, so I'm assuming probably all business class seating. But yeah, and it was a 727-200, I believe. So that's about the going rate of a 727 these days, is around $1 million. So but if it will let me zoom in here, maybe.
Southwest 093, contact Indianapolis Center on 119.55. 119.55 for Southwest 093.
Come on. There we go. Notice this aircraft is the city of Frankfurt, and again, that's because TWA did not operate the 100s much in the United States. They were pretty much used for based in Europe for their European, I guess you could say, for lack of a better term, domestic destinations. And I just noticed that their fan blades aren't spinning. They're a solid texture, or a static texture. I haven't actually looked at the aircraft that zoomed in. So yes, TWA in the 70s and 80s began to rival and surpass Pan Am in terms of international travel for ferrying U.S. passengers, in particular over to Europe, and to a lesser extent into Asia. Then deregulation hit in the late 70s. They purchased Ozark Airlines, which was also based out of St. Louis Lambert International Airport. And then were acquired and essentially raided by Carl Icahn, who, one of the first things he did was to sell TWA's very profitable operations and routes to London Heathrow and gates at London to American Airlines. And then proceeded to really kind of strip out the company of everything that made it profitable, selling it off, and then eventually, by the 1990s, he was ousted and the company went private. However, there was a website that was, I believe, cheapfares.com that TWA was basically forced to give a large number of seats to at a highly discounted price that Carl Icahn owned in those days. And it was one of those things that in and out of bankruptcies a couple of times in the 90s. They had started to right the ship, being an employee-owned company, by the mid to late 1990s, and then, you know, they just couldn't survive without those international travel destinations. Another problem that TWA had was they ignored the whole Pacific region for the most part, and failed to develop new markets into Asia, which, you know, has turned out to be booming operations in this day and age. So that was a couple of the major mistakes, but a lot of it has to rest at the feet of, well, Carl Icahn, who did things like, force them to move their headquarters to a building that he owned, and so he rented his own building, essentially, sucked money out of the company that way. Made him a very wealthy man, but
I don't like these long flights. I hate using the plane's restrooms.
okay, so the airline attendant does not like long flights. This is not a long flight. It's going to be like an hour and some odd minutes long. Not like we're going across the country. But I will say this much, going to the airport in St. Louis, unless you're going to the East Terminal, its main terminal is depressing. I can remember going there as a kid in the 80s and 90s, and, you know, back before 9/11, since it was a hub for TWA, a lot of people would have an hour or two layover, friends, family. We went and saw, and a lot of friends and family at the airport would meet them, maybe grab a bite to eat for lunch there, talk to them on their layover, see how things are going until they got ready to leave. In fact, when I was a kid, I remember going to the airport more to visit people than actually to fly anywhere. We really didn't fly much until really I was an adult. I flew more as an adult than I did I have as an adult than I did as a kid. Sadly, though, I never flew on TWA. My father flew on TWA a number of times as he worked for McDonnell Douglas and would often have to go out, well, I say often, about once a year, maybe twice a year, have to fly out to the West Coast, out to Long Beach. And there was a 5 o'clock flight that was an L-1011 that usually he would get on and fly out there. That plane started its day in Boston, land in St. Louis about noon, fly out to LA, fly back to St. Louis, and then go back to Boston. 4 miles, 6 o'clock. I'm not exactly sure how I'm supposed to say that I see traffic behind me. I see his contrail. Ah, there he is. Howdy ho. They're Popular Gaming. And FYI, the stream is probably on about a 30-second delay, so if I don't acknowledge you immediately, that would be why. Alright, so it looks like weather's fairly decent out. I do not have another frequency on my list here. We should be about 115 nautical miles. There we go. Zero. Put the nose down. Also, sadly, I never did get to fly on the 727, although when I was a kid, there was something I didn't like about the general look of the 727 for some odd reason. It just was never quite that appealing. I think I liked kind of the looks of the 737, although the 737 that I remember really started to remember was the 300 series with kind of the really oddly shaped engine nacelles. They weren't completely round. It looked like somebody had smashed them into the ground and had kind of a flatter bottom.
Tango Bravo 068, contact Indianapolis Center on 120.65. 120.65, Tango Bravo 068. Indianapolis Center, Tango Bravo.
Well, a person I know who flew 727s, his son, a friend of mine growing up, and he flies 737s for, his son does, my old buddy, for Southwest Airlines now. Became a pilot. And oddly, of people I knew growing up, I am a pilot, but never became a professional pilot as a career. Just as a private pilot. Alright, well, we'll continue our descent rate at about 2,500, 2,600 feet per minute here. Another aircraft that I haven't flown on, and I hope to one of these days, is a 747 before they're all retired.
Please fasten your seatbelts and make sure all portable electronic devices are securely stowed so that we may secure the cabin for arrival.
But anymore, it just seems like the 737 and the Airbus A320 series has basically taken over the world, where I now notice that there's a lot of flights from like Seattle and San Francisco to Hawaii on 737s, and I'm not sure I want to fly like a 6-8 hour flight on a 737. I think that'd be a little bit much. Zurich, I'm about to say, what was it? I think it was an Airbus A330 that we flew back on from Zurich to Chicago the last time. I did fly on a Embraer, was it 175 or 195? I think it was 175, up to LaGuardia this past spring. Finished reinstalling it. Is it wanting to work again, or... Oh,
We're passing transition altitude, Captain.
Concord Alex, one of the things that might get slightly screwed up that I found is some plugins install in some weird places, so if they're installed, it's somehow in the Windows registry or the game registry config file or something, and I noticed that whenever I tried to reinstall it the first time last year, that there was some strange funkiness going on, and that's because add-ons for like FsPassengers and in particular FS Captain were in folders and directories much outside of the FSX primary directory wherever you install it. no auto throttle on this aircraft. I am using the CH flight yoke, or flight sim yoke, and throttle quadrant. So if we're 115 miles from next waypoint was 80 miles. Okay, so we are approximately 30 miles, 30 nautical miles from Phyllis, which was the next waypoint, and 15 to Creep.
Tango Bravo 060, you are 51 miles west, turn left heading 045, expect vectors, ILS, runway 24, right approach. Turn left heading 045, expect vectors, ILS, runway 24, right approach. Tango Bravo 060.
ILS 24 right. Get out a pen here. Now, normally I would go look up frequencies for airports. Unfortunately, what's in the Flight Sim database and what's in the FAA database these days aren't always the same numbers. So I've learned to just go with what's in the Flight Sim database. 24 right, so 111.9. 111.9. All right. So we'll start getting set up here for approach. 1.9. The squirrel wheel on my mouse has kind of gotten a little bit screwy in the past. 0.9. So I've got a wind shear warning ahead. So I could get a little bit of Revo uninstaller. That might be a good suggestion for Concord Alex there. Partly cloudy. Apt name for today. Well, we got. Looks like we have some Frontier, Delta, Delta Connect, American Eagle. Wow, this is an old. That's an old TWA aircraft with the TW registration. Back to Captain. Anyway, those will be phased out. The MD-80 out of American's fleet, I believe, by the end of this year. I think they've accelerated their phase out. Delta seems to still be getting a hold of as many of them as they can, and I believe Allegiant is, or is it Allegiant? Yeah, Allegiant still exists. Wasn't it the other one that Southwest bought, AirTran? I think Southwest bought AirTran, and Allegiant still operates the MD-80. Oh, hey, we got a weather update. Hi, Sudden Cloud Deck. Nice to meet you.
Contact Indianapolis Center on 135.125. 135.125 for Tango Bravo 068.
So, Dayton
Indianapolis Center, Tango
is home of right at Patterson Air Force Base and the National Museum of the United States Air Force. And if you like airplanes, I have to say that I think the Wright-Patterson Museum is probably the best in the world. If you like airplanes and you ever get a chance to stop by there at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, I highly recommend it. It is a heck of a museum. Airspeed is creeping up there, so I'm going to reduce our throttle.
Descend and maintain 3,000. Descend and maintain 3,000. Tango Bravo 068.
So we need to dump airspeed because we're going to be going below 10,000. Descent rate about 2,500 feet per minute, usually what I aim for.
Tango Bravo 060. Turn right heading 075. Turn right heading 075. Tango Bravo 068. Tango Bravo 060. Contact gate approach on 134.45. 134.45. Tango Bravo 068.
Pull up the air brake a little bit.
Approach Tango Bravo 068. Descent 12,000. Descending 3,000. Tango Bravo 068. Dayton approach. Roger. Altimeter 3002.
Maintain our speed.
Descending below 10,000 feet.
And this is an FsPassengers thing, but they like to have your landing lights on below 10,000 feet because reasons. But again, the Captain Sim 727 product and FsPassengers do not get along when it comes to detecting whether or not lights are on or not. Now, you can change the difficulty settings in FsPassengers to ignore that, so it won't deduct points, I think specifically because of that. But we are in a scenario, we're doing the international airline scenario for FsPassengers, where the points don't matter. The pilot is not in career mode. So it's kind of like whose line is it anyway? Just so long as you safely get on the ground, you can have up to 3 crashes. But so long as you're on the ground safely, you can get as many negative points as you want. I try to keep those to a minimum, but with some aircraft you're going to get knocked off a negative 80 to negative 120 points to just start things with, so ooh, a little bit of turbulence here. And we're getting wind shear warnings earlier. That's not horrible, because if there's turbulence as you're getting ready to land and bad weather, you get bonus points.
$2,500.
Increase throttle a little bit here. Keep our airspeed above 200 until we get a DME capture. Until we see the needles.
Departure, Frontier Flight 198 is climbing through 2,400 for 14,000. Frontier Flight 198, Dayton, departure, roger, altimeter 3002.
So planned arrival in 24 minutes. I bet you we're going to probably hit that pretty...
Echo Bravo 068, turn right heading 120. Turn right heading 120, Echo Bravo 068.
1, 2, 0, 3. I don't think Dayton is all that big of an airport.
Echo Bravo 068, contact Dayton approach on 127.65. Going to 127.65, Echo Bravo 068.
Alright, 150. Keeping an eye on the throttles, keeping my right hand on the throttles.
right heading 185. Turn right heading 185. Tango Bravo 068.
Slats extended.
Tango Bravo 068. Turn left heading 155. Turn left heading 155. Tango Bravo 068.
Now we're going to do what I call the FSX ATC bounce, where it's going to send me between two directional headings. A couple of times, then it'll ask me to go back to 185. So something else you'll notice that is not on this aircraft is there is no auto brake, and I do not believe that spoilers automatically deploy. So they have to be manually deployed. Again, I have a CH throttle quadrant, so that makes life rather easy as far as that goes.
Flaps 5.
Tango Bravo 068. You are 2 miles northeast. Turn right heading 215. Descend and maintain 2,600. Cleared ILS. Runway 24. Right approach. Maintain 2,600 until established as a localizer. Contact Dayton Tower on 119er. Turn right heading 215. Descend and maintain 2,600. Cleared ILS. Runway 24. Right approach. Maintain 2,600 until established. Tower on 119.9er. Tango Bravo 068. Dayton Tower, Tango Bravo 068 is 21 miles northeast. Inbound ILS, runway 24, right approach. Tango Bravo 068, Dayton Tower, estimate straight in, runway 24, right, altimeter 3001. Fly straight in, runway 24, right, Tango Bravo 068.
Okay. So wind is out at 267, basically front at 6. Okay. So it doesn't look like we will be running in. We're 21 miles. Only thing that has me slightly concerned here is extend to flaps 10 and reduce our speed to 160.
Flaps 15.
Or, I'm sorry, flaps 15. My eyes aren't what they used to be. And the text is relatively small. Let's slow to approach speed. 23 miles. We should be getting a localizer signal by now, I would think. Have things set for auto glide slope. So with the autopilot in this aircraft, you have to be below the glide slope in order to capture it. But the key indication is if you do get the ILS signal, it'll automatically disengage the altitude or the heading hold, and then the altitude hold whenever you do have glide slope capture, and it's gone down. Thus far, 111.9. I'll double check the frequency here. Although we're not quite 24 right, 111.9. Virtual cockpit. Course. We're going to want course 240. Go ahead and increase our speed a little bit here. Maybe we don't quite have the localizer signal. It's programmed into the oh, that would be why 111.9. There we go. There was an error on pilot part. So again, we do have bore lock capture. It has disengaged our heading select. Now, this is a Cat 2 ILS. You can tell because it says here, which means it's good down to about 100 feet. Typical landing procedures for this aircraft would include writing it down to minimums, which is set at 300. Disengaging autopilot at that point, and then taking it in the rest of the way manually. And I want to maintain airspeed about 160. When we capture glide slope, I'll probably decrease that to about 150. Well, where we're at about right now, 150. About where we want to approach. Again, whenever we do get glide slope capture, start nosing down. I'll deploy the remainder of the flaps.
Gear down.
Gear down.
Gear down. 3 green. A little bit of turbulence.
Flaps 25.
1,000. 1,000.
Approaching 2-4 right.
Flaps 30.
Disengaging autopilot because we're going to get the seesaw.
500. 500. 400. 400. Approaching minimums. Minimums. 100. 100. 50. 50. 40. 30. 20. 10.
Reverse thrust available.
Knots.
4,000 feet remaining.
Reverse thrusters engaged.
Okay, that was a problem. Reverse thrusters did not want to engage
3,000
initially.
feet remaining.
60 knots.
I'm going to have to go look at my CH throttle profile.
Tango Bravo 068, exit runway with you.
Please remain seated until the aircraft has come to a complete stop.
Tango Bravo 068, contact ground on 121.9er. Point 121.9er, Tango Bravo 068. Dayton ground, Tango Bravo 068, taxi to the gate. Tango Bravo 068, taxi to gate Golf 12.
All right.
Taxiway Sierra, Romeo.
Let's turn the radar to standby.
Taxiing to gate Golf 12, using taxiway Sierra, Romeo, Uniform, Papa, Mike, Tango Bravo 068.
And let's make people a little bit more happy with some more music on the ground. Use the engines for a little bit of differential. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived a few minutes early at Dayton, Ohio, where the outside temperature is a balmy 90-something odd degrees Fahrenheit, 23 degrees Celsius for you Europeans out there. I will say this much about TWA. I never heard too many people complain about the service price. You don't hear the complaint, or you didn't hear the complaints with TWA that you hear with many airlines today, like American United. I don't know if any of you had any experience with TWA back in the day. If so, when this video eventually makes it to the main YouTube channel, be sure to put comments in the section below and let me know. But I think we're going to be taxiing to the gate pretty much exactly right on time. And yes, I will go back and do a replay of the landing once I've gotten to the gate and we have ended the flight for FsPassengers. Because FsPassengers really doesn't like it when you do an instant replay. It gets very picky very quickly. Oh, and there's a big old deer right outside my window. Looking straight in the window, right at me. We have woods in our backyard, so... with deer and raccoon and other foresty creatures. Wow, I'm glad I built in all of that extra time because they're wanting us to taxi around the gate, or around the world, get to the gate. I mean, this is a super busy airport, can't you tell? Oh, we found out where all the jetways are. They're on the other concourse. See an American Eagle. 135 or 145 Embraer. Now we'll see how bad my parking job is here. Alright, turn on the APU. And with that switched over,
Ladies and gentlemen, the door is open. Please Make your way to the exit, and please make sure you have all your personal items and carry-on luggage. Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived at our destination. On behalf of the captain and crew, we thank you for flying with us, and we hope that you'll join us again.
Alright. We got the aircraft set up for next time. Time to end flight. So landing speed was 137 knots, which is a little bit fast. But landing touchdown vertical speed was only in negative 135 feet per minute, which is considered to be a kiss. Landing pitch about 5 degrees, 5.6, so that's about the right amount of flare. So again, we got the landing lighting issues for negative 110 points, which is a Captain Sim FsPassengers. Perfect flight, no problems. Arrival, precise time at destination, we're 2 minutes early. Extreme weather conditions during approach, but safe landing, plus 100. Like I said, we got bonus points, and we made a very smooth landing, plus 50 points. So with this, our reputation should be 100%, and now should be is now 76%. I'm going to go ahead and put that up, and then we're going to look at the tower from KDAY. Nice tower view we got there going on. Instant replay. What do you guys think? About 400 seconds? See where that puts us. On the ground. Options. Instant replay. 460 seconds. And really poor visibility because apparently the tower is obstructed by foliage and trees. And still not far enough back. 560 seconds. Okay. 600 seconds. Getting closer. 630 seconds. There we go. Normally I edit this stuff out whenever I do video recording. Coming in. A little bit long. Now again, I had slammed back my throttles, but didn't activate the thrust reversers till the second time that I did it down the runway, which I've got to go look at the programming. I might need to readjust some values there. So the autopilot on the landing is doing something that I call seesawing, which if you don't get things in the exact right order and lined up, it has a tendency to want to fluctuate and basically run like a roller coaster or a seesaw up and down. So that's why at about 500 feet I went ahead and disengaged the autopilot. We had wind coming in at about 26 degrees, 267, 270. So yeah, we were a little bit long. Not quite center line. Yeah, then the thrust reversers engaged the second time around, so... Alright. Well, I'm going to consider that to be the end of a successful flight. Thank you very much for watching, both of those of you live as well as other viewers who will be watching it later on YouTube. Until next time, see you later.